The US job market is waning and showing signs of a potential crisis. And this isn't just me saying all of this. This is right in the data. But what's surprising is that it's carrying over into other areas and it's showing major weaknesses in the consumer just overall in the United States. So is this signs of a recession that is actually here and the crash is coming? We're going to get into all of this, but first, let's dive into the jobs market because it is showing some alarming signs here, to say the very least, folks, because employment at the US at small businesses is falling. The small business, 10,000 jobs lost, according to ADP. And it's a 3-month average of job losses of 30,000. It's highest since the 2020 pandemic. Now, of course, the 2020 pandemic, I mean, look at this. That had a big, giant job loss. But we're starting to see a consistent trend here. And trends in the negative direction are never a good thing, folks, because we're not only seeing that, we're seeing job postings plunge. Now, this is something that I've been covering for a long time on this channel. So if you're coming back, please hit that subscribe button because 91% of you guys are not subscribed. Either way, hit the like button because I am going to be covering how 6.4% of these job layoff plunges, well, it's something that is anticipated because there's such a low barrier to entry now when it comes to actually making these jobs postings. Because when you post these jobs, right, you've got 6% year over year. And all you have to do is go onto LinkedIn, post this job. All you have to do is to go on to, Indeed in these places, just upload the description really quickly, and then you can potentially get a bunch of candidates, then decide to pull all of that, honestly, very quickly after. Now, with this, right, are we going to see some waning in the overall market in just the consumer at large? Because the consumer, once we start to see a big layoff and hurting of the consumer, that lays over into other markets. Now we're seeing private payrolls actually going up, which I think is kind of a contradictory stat to what I have been showing you guys here lately. And I think that this is just from ADP. It's from a bigger corporation and aspect of that. So the small businesses, which have previously had 50% of the overall jobs, well, those are going away. So we're getting to bigger and bigger corporations, which is never a good thing. Of course, we love our small businesses, and there is honestly just no better place in the world to build a small business than the United States. But either way, these private payrolls rising 42,000 in October is more than the market fears. And it's countering all of that, right? Which is very interesting because the job creation came from companies employing at least 250 workers. That category added 76,000 jobs. So see, everywhere else is actually down because smaller business lost 34. So the big dogs, the big corporations, those are the guys that are growing and swallowing up all of these little players, which I think is very interesting because we're starting to see that growth lay over. So with this government shutdown, because everybody wants to relate it to the government shutdown, you have to ask the question, is the job market better or worse now that we've had all of this? Well, I don't have to answer that directly because we've got a great article here, right? Is the job market worse? This is what we know, right? They lined out some facts for us. The government shutting down made it harder to answer. How is the job market doing? The impasse in Congress is as overfunding, right? So without the jobs official tally, right, we've got policymakers and everything else. We got the private sector, like the ADP numbers coming out, and people are still feeling uncertain. What I think, honestly, with all of this, it just shows that the United States still operates very well with the government shutdown. I mean, have you guys honestly noticed a huge difference? I personally haven't. Of course, I'm overseas right now, but I mean, I think it's all business as usual. It's a sign that shows the private sector is actually what really runs and maintains the entire United States. It's not the public sector as many tried to believe. So As we start to see this, one thing that it does lay over is the housing market. Because, of course, as you guys know, when I cover on this channel, that, in order to buy a house, you need a job or you need a good source of income. And if that source of income gets cut off, you can't buy a house. You might have to sell that house, and maybe the job market or people won't be able to sell. So there's this weird impasse, so to speak, about having these different jobs on the market as well as, being able to afford houses. So now that the housing market is starting to see mortgages fall, you got to think, okay, with these mortgages falling, are we going to start to see a housing boom? Well, not so fast, my friend. We actually might see the opposite because we're starting to see, houses really slow down. Houses are going back onto more of a healthy, just normalized market where we're starting to see, maybe 3 months at a time, starting to see these corporation or these houses stay on the market opposed to the, up on the market for a day or two, and that's when it gets taken off and you get an offer hundreds of thousands of dollars over. We're not seeing that market anymore, and I think that's healthy. We're never probably going to see that again. But the unique aspect that we do have from all of this is that the average mortgage now has a 4% or lower interest rate right now. So now that these interest rates are still floating around 6%, well, are we going to get that major sell off? We haven't just yet. So, with jobs sort of waning and the interest rates where they are at current houses, the housing market has been moving very, very slowly. And I don't anticipate for this to speed up, even when the Fed decides to cut rates, if they decide to do so, because in 33 days, it looks like there's just about a 70% chance that this is going to happen. Now, as you guys know, I show this almost every single live stream, but within the last, month prior, we didn't see below like an 85% chance that we were going to cut interest rates before the last meeting. Now, we started off with about a 60% chance, let's say. Yeah. So yesterday was below 70%. We've increased. A week ago we were at 63% of cutting interest rates. So that percentage has increased. But without the proper data, this could be delayed. And this is something that Jerome Powell has already come out and said is that, hey, if we're not, seeing the numbers, how can we make a data-based decision? And go figure, Jerome Powell, too late is his nickname from Donald Trump. And there's a reason for that, right? Because he likes to use all this backward looking data, which honestly is very inefficient. And that, is now going to start to see how we're going to see, these interest rates really pile up. Now, with this, right, we've also seen a resurgence of the dollar. The dollar has had a 50-year historically bad start to the year. 50 years. Now, since 1973, we've only had, or since 1971, we've only had 1 year that started off the dollar worse than this year. And that was in 1973, just 2 years allegedly after we went off the gold standard. Okay. Of course, I know officially we went off the gold standard in 1971, but there's, some that believe that we maybe went off that gold standard a little bit earlier. So, with all that, right, we're also seeing the stock market pump a little bit, but it's having a little bit of a pullback here. I was thinking we were going to get it up to the right where we were going to see 6,900 in the S&P, but we've been actually seeing a pretty down week here as the start of November has been coming down here pretty significantly, right? 3% in the past 5 days. I know that we're used to so much volatility, but for the S&P 500 down 3% in a week is a pretty historically bad week, right? I mean, normally we start to see the S&P really pump, but we're looking at just kind of an uneven market, and this is where I think it's going to be interesting. This is something I'm going to keep monitoring because of, just how volatile the overall market is, right? I mean, we're seeing people are saying, oh, the fear and greed index. we're looking at extreme fear in the market because everybody's worried about a recession. But let's be honest here. We know that a recession is not going to occur until people lose faith in the overall government. And seeing the fear and greed index, we're starting to see some of those worries come to the top. Now, we've got George in the chat saying never see that again. That might not age well long term. Point being, surge before GFC was passed, before the COVID crashes or craziness. Yeah, I mean, I agree with you here, George. But what I think is that the U.S. is learning from their mistakes, showing that hey, we can't have interest rates just at flat zero and housing markets at I got my interest rate under 3%. I would be very hard pressed to see if we ever see something that low ever again. I mean, if you look back historically, that is almost a once in a lifetime opportunity to rent or to get an interest rate that low. Housing has never been that low previously. So I'd be surprised if we get back to there, especially with now having the core inflation rate, the target being 2 to 3%. So, as All Nighter Hider was saying, right, where we left the gold standard in 64, 71 was a public announcement. I agree with you, man. I definitely think that we got off of that a little bit earlier than the 1971 official date, so to speak, right? The officials in quotes, right? Because hey, we're still watching all this, but there's a lot of market volatility, and I think it's very interesting when you look at the various sectors, manufacturing being a huge sector that's showing crisis mode. And there's going to be others that really start to see, this consumer really starting to hurt. But I think the biggest one is that we're seeing is that the consumer sentiment and the overall, just, I guess, if we're doing a vibe check here, right? A vibe check for the overall consumer. It's not great, folks. So this is something that we got to watch and maintain, because as we see the consumer start to lose faith, that's something that will potentially spark that recession. So make sure you guys are hitting that subscribe button, hit the like button for me, because I'm bringing this to you guys almost every single day. So subscribe, hit the bell notifications, join the fellas in the chat, tell a friend to tell a friend, and I'll catch you guys all at the next one.